Reviewing watches is a weird pastime. Most reviews are a little bit boring because the watches are uninspiring. Reviewing a Tudor Black Bay monochrome or a Submariner or any other black bezel, black dive watch is about as interesting as the watch itself. These kinds of watches sell a ton, but there's not a lot to say about them. And then every now and again, a brand or a watch comes along that isn't boring, that doesn't look like all the others. And that's when it gets interesting. This is all about the Zelos Spearfish Dual. Let's dive in. Zelos is a Singapore brand that has been around since 2014. It was founded by a guy called Elshan, and it's a smaller watch brand that has a loyal community around the world and enjoys a popularity where the new models are often very quickly sold out. By now, they have a relatively expansive catalog of offers, with the Mako, the Swordfish, and the Spearfish being some of their most popular models. Zelos hangs around at the $500 to $2,000 space, which is a massively competitive space. This is where you find Christopher Ward, Monta, Formex, Baltic, and a million others. This is the value for money space, which I've spoken about so many times before. Watches in this space tend to be, from a specifications perspective, very similar. There's often going to be some variant of a Zelos movement inside. The bracelets are going to be pretty good milled bracelets, often with screwed pins and easy adjust mechanisms. The finishing is often very good. You often get the feeling that these brands, because they don't have the ability to do everything in-house, all source their components from the same factories. So aesthetically, they may be different, but as I said, spec-wise, they're all kind of the same, which makes for easy desktop comparisons. With all that said though, let's get the specs out of the way. The Spearfish Dual is a 40mm watch. It has a lug-to-lug of 47mm. It has a 20mm lug width. It has a screw-down crown. The water resistance is 100 meters. The case and bracelet are titanium with a hardened coating, sort of citizen style. There's a ton of burn-off-your-face lume, and inside you get a Zelos SW300 movement with a TT651 module, making this a big date dual-time GMT style watch. The price, $2,199. $2,199 for this level of specs is competitive. A Monta SkyQuest GMT will set you back about $2,500. A Christopher Ward GMT in steel goes for around $1,400. Given the movement, the titanium material, and the levels of finishing, I think this is a perfectly reasonable price that doesn't raise any massive alarm bells. Not to me, at least. What's good and what's bad about the build of this watch? Titanium. Titanium is more expensive than steel. It's harder to work on than steel. That makes it more expensive. It's also typically more durable, more corrosion resistant, and anti-allergenic. Titanium has a lot going for it. I own one or two titanium watches, which I love, but they take getting used to, because my mind at least is coded to believe that weight equals build quality. A titanium watch doesn't convey that solidity simply because it's so much lighter. I think this watch is really well put together. The tolerances, so how the clasp opens and closes, and the jangliness of the bracelet, and how the crown feels when winding, are all very good. But titanium just feels light and cheap sometimes. It isn't, but you have to be mindful of how your mind passes that lightness. The lume is excellent. It's that simple. It has two colors, which is good on the dual time part, but I would have preferred it to be a single color most other places. The finishing of the case and bracelet is really well done. On the watch, you've got enough angles and surfaces with enough contrast to know that this watch isn't a lazy effort. Thought and work have been put into the design and the execution. You get a simple quick change bracelet mechanism, a feature that more and more is making its way into the space, but it isn't ubiquitous yet. The bracelet feels a little bit rough, and I've thought a bit about why. Initially, I thought it was badly finished, but I've ended up concluding that it's not a flaw of manufacturing, but at least in part it has something to do with the texture of titanium. A Pelagos 39 or a 300M from Omega in titanium has a similar feel to it. It's hard to explain, but that smoothness you get from steel just isn't quite there. When it comes to the movement, usually I don't care for display case backs on Zelos movements. The Zelos movement is rarely a beauty to behold, but this custom rotor is one of the nicer ones. It's not chronometer regulated, but it gets the job done. And finally, there's the dial. A lot of work has gone into this dial in terms of design and finishing techniques. The little globe on the dual tone subdial is pretty. It's not a laser-etched multicolor globe like on an Omega world timer, but it looks good, is clear, clean, and crisp, and it gets the job done. The dial, which isn't quite a skeleton, but kind of is, has multiple finishing techniques like perlage that give this watch a whole lot of character. The visible date change mechanism is a cool touch. All in all, this watch is really well put together and finished. Which brings me to whether I like or don't like this watch. Elshan from Zelos actually wrote to me and asked if I wanted to review this watch. I jumped at the chance because, like I said at the beginning, this is not a bland middle-of-the-road watch. I knew there was something interesting to say about this watch. And also, before I received this watch, I was convinced I wouldn't like it. I thought on paper it had way too much going on. And for all the complaining I do about bland middle-of-the-road dive watches and dress watches, I actually tend to lean towards those bland middle-of-the-road watches. But as TGV says, you can't review a watch based on pictures. When it arrived, the first thing my wife and I both said in unison was, "This watch looks cool." And it really does. This watch, although what I would call it a semi-skeleton, is kind of a design that has all the potential pitfalls of a skeleton watch. Our eyes want balance and symmetry and simplicity, and on paper, there's a lot going on this dial. You've got the visible date changer, the dual time globe, the multiple dial finishing techniques, but it all works. The symmetry is so obviously there. The watch is balanced with the date dials balancing the top half of the dial against the globe on the bottom half. And those techniques blend really well. Everything in my simple brain says this watch shouldn't work, but it does. On the wrist, this watch looks great. It wears well. It has enough going on to keep you interested with things like visible perlage, but it isn't in any way so busy that your eyes tire of it. The only thing I don't really like is that the lume has two different colors. I understand why it does on the dual time. That's for clarity and readability, but it feels a bit much to me on the rest of the dial. But it is quite literally the only thing that I'm not a fan of. The coolest feature for me is the date change. I just love seeing how the mechanism works. It's just fun. I can't count the number of times I've pulled this watch out of the box and said to myself, I need to keep it for a couple of more days because I like the look of it so much. And that's a high bar for me. Now, who's this watch for? Well, it's not for everyone. Not a lot of people want a semi-skeleton dual-time GMT titanium watch with visible perlage on the dial. It's a bridge too far in terms of aesthetic for most middle-of-the-road customers, which is understandable. This watch falls partially in the same category of watches as the CW12 Skeleton or the Tudor Pelagos FXD Alinghi. Watches like these are made for two reasons. They are made to offer something to niche enthusiast buyers. They are for the people that really dig the brand and what they do. For people that already have a Zelos Mako or a Swordfish and want more from that brand. And then these watches are for enthusiasts who want something different, that want something not middle of the road, something that isn't a plain white Oxford shirt, but something with a bit more personality. This watch has tons of personality. Finally, a watch like this is made to show what you're capable of as a watchmaker. It's not quite a piece unique, but making this kind of watch and doing it well isn't easy. Making your variant of a middle-of-the-road diver is doable for a lot of people. But being able to do this and not end up with some hideous monstrosity is hard. And Zelos succeed. I think they succeed all the way around. This was my first long-term hands-on experience with a Zelos. Based on this watch, I think we're dealing with a brand that makes solid, well put together and finished watches that are reasonably priced for the build quality on offer. More importantly though, they demonstrate that they are committed to watch design. It's become relatively easy to call some manufacturers and launch a relatively nice, inoffensive diver or dress watch onto the market. But this isn't just another inoffensive diver or dress watch. I've been doing this watch collecting thing for a long time, and I've only been a YouTuber for a little over a year now, but I've noticed that both things have led me to set the bar high for my expectations from watch brands. Because it's relatively speaking so easy to source what you need, I expect pretty much all finishing and materials and components to be of a very high standard. For that reason, I also expect that brands do more to make an interesting offering. A watch in this space that reminds me of a Submariner is not going to cut it in terms of creativity. I want something that sets the brand apart aesthetically. It doesn't have to be Invicta or U-boat ugly. I want it to be good looking, but I expect a concerted attempt at crafting a design language that sets the brand apart. Just like the oyster case that instantly tells me from a distance that it is a Rolex, I want to be able to spot the design language of Doxa or Formex or Zelos. It needs to stand out and be distinctive, and Zelos does that. The work that goes into this type of design is just that bit more demanding, and it is something I look for in a brand. And Zelos with this watch, the Supernova version of the same model, the Swordfish with the meteorite dial, the Mako with the mother of pearl, and a lot of others, I do think they stand out. When I was writing back and forth with Elshan from Zelos, he offered for me to keep the watch as a thank you for taking the time to review it. He didn't have any strings attached, but I chose to say no. It's not what I want to do with my channel, but in all honesty, it was a hard decision because it's a very nice watch. Putting it in the box and shipping it back was annoying because I really liked it. Now, you might like Zelos, you might not. This design might speak to you, it might not. But the thing I think is cool is that I got a feel for a brand that is not trying to be cookie cutter. They are trying to offer something distinctive, and that I think is the coolest part. I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say about Zelos. What's the long-term quality like? What's the customer service like? What are your favorite models? Those of you that have experiences with them, let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe. Cheers.